It's time for the blood lab, everybody. This is Dr. Jenkins for a little bit of an introduction to our lab this week on blood typing. And in addition, we'll talk a little bit about taking pulse and taking blood pressure. Okay, so everything is laid out in this lab, but as always, I like to take a little bit of time to point out some things and just make sure that everyone's understanding what we're talking about. So last week, we talked about the heart, and you remember from last week's lab that the heart has the 4 chambers, right? Right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. We know that the heart is going to pump out oxygenated blood to the body. So now we're going to talk about the blood as it exists in these blood vessels. So make sure that you understand arteries. Then I'm going to switch to blue for veins. Let's do it. And veins, right? So the blood that's coming out of the heart, remember, blood vessels are one-way streets, okay? So the blood that's being pumped out of the heart, like this picture I've showed you, it's red because it contains oxygen. And that blood is going to go to all of the cells in our body. And then at the cells in our body, oxygen is dropped off so that what returns to the heart returns through veins, and the veins are colored blue because they are considered to be deoxygenated. So they do not contain oxygen. So make sure you know the difference. So in the blue we have veins, and you should know that veins carry blood towards the heart. And you should know that veins carry blood that is deoxygenated. So veins carry blood towards the heart, and veins carry blood that is deoxygenated, does not contain oxygen. On the other hand, arteries carry blood away from the heart, and arteries carry blood that is oxygenated. All right? So arteries carry blood away from the heart, and arteries carry blood that is oxygenated. In the middle, we have capillaries, and I'm going to put that as purple. And the capillaries exist in a bed, so it kind of looks like this. So capillary bed. And this is where the exchange actually takes place. So this is occurring at the cells. The capillary beds are in between the arteries and the veins. So if we were to do this in order, we would see that the heart pumps out blood that is oxygenated through the arteries, and it leads to the cells, and it leads to the capillary bed. At the capillary bed, oxygen gets dropped off, and then carbon dioxide gets picked up. Because carbon dioxide, it's a waste product, so we don't want it to build up. So we put that accumulating waste product of carbon dioxide back into the capillaries, and then that carbon dioxide-rich blood travels back through the veins. Remember, the veins carry blood towards the heart, but this blood is deoxygenated, so it does not contain oxygen, but it does contain CO2. That same picture is right here, my friends. Remember, arteries are carrying blood away from the heart, and that blood does contain oxygen. Veins are carrying blood towards the heart, and that venous blood does not contain oxygen. In between them is the capillaries, and this is where exchange takes place. Now, what about the blood itself? Okay, so if we look at the blood, and we're going to talk about the blood in the arteries. That's going to be the focus of today's lab, this week's lab. So here's our bloodstream. And it's arterial blood, that's why I have it in red. And inside that blood, we have a bunch of stuff. 45% of the bloodstream is made up of cells and platelets. You need to know that number. Versus 55% of the blood is plasma, which is mostly water. So imagine we have this fluid, right? And we need the fluid in the blood because that's the transport medium. So of the 45% cells, we have red blood cells. I'm going to put the white blood cells as purple just so they stand out more. We have white blood cells. And then we have things called platelets. Make sure you review the function of each. So if we talk about red blood cells, let me change that, they carry oxygen. So the red blood cells, their job is to carry oxygen. Really important job. The white blood cells, their job is immunity, which in other words means they fight infection. So indeed, if we take someone's blood when they're sick, they're likely to have an increase in white blood cell count. And lastly, we have the platelets. I'm sorry, everyone. We just rescued a new kitten from our backyard, a stray. And little Oscar has decided to come say hello. You want to squeak for the class? No? Okay. And platelets are responsible for blood clotting, which is also really important. So make sure that you know those functions. Excellent. The next part of this lab talks about blood types. And I'm going to explain it, but let me just introduce it this way. These can be tricky. So I don't want you to feel like if it's kind of hard to grasp, you're not alone. For whatever reason, these can be tricky. So please, please, please don't feel sad because it's harder for you to get. Stick with it. You're not alone. And the benefit of this video is that you can go back and listen to it again and hopefully, with enough practice, understand it. So here we have a table, and this is a table that shows up in the lab. In the lab, it actually has a table. I don't know why it didn't show up here, but that's okay. Everyone's heard of blood types. So for example, I know that I'm A positive. Someone might be B negative. Someone might be AB negative. Someone might be O positive. Well, what on earth do all those things mean? What we're talking about is in the bloodstream, right, which we've just talked about. So we know we have the bloodstream. We're talking about arterial blood for now. And we already know that we have these red blood cells. Actually, I'll write RBC. So we have these red blood cells. Well, it turns out that, just gonna hold on for 1 second. I think little Oscar is getting into some trouble. Okay, he's okay. So what happens is these red blood cells have something on them called antigens. So if I draw the red blood cell, they have on them these little things called antigens. They really don't look like little blue horns, but I'm just doing that for emphasis. So they have these things called antigens. Make a little key here. These are antigens, and they're just a type of protein. And they're just there, okay? Depending on what type of antigen you have, that tells you what your blood type is. Let me say that again. what antigen you have on your red blood cell surface, that tells you what your blood type is. So for example, let's say that this white blood cell on the right has the A antigen, whereas the red blood cell on the left has a B antigen. So they're just there, okay? If someone has the A antigen on their red blood cell surface, they are an A blood type. If someone has the B antigen on their red blood cell surface, then they are a B blood type. How about that? Let's talk about A, B, and O, and we'll continue this example because it's working reasonably well for us. Okay, so here we have more red blood cells. Well, let's say that a red blood cell has both A antigens and B antigens. If it has both A and B antigens, that person is the AB blood type. But what if a person has no antigens? Because that happens. If there are no antigens present, that person is an O blood type. Okay? So this can get confusing, but if we just try and simplify it, on our red blood cells, we have these little proteins called antigens. And our blood type is based off of what antigens we have. If a person has the A antigen on their red blood cell, then they have A blood type. If they have the B antigen, they have the B blood type. If they have both A and B antigens, they have the AB blood type. And if they have neither, they don't have any antigens, they have the O blood type. And of course this matters because if we give blood to someone, so sometimes if you get into an accident, you lose a lot of blood, you'll need to be given blood at the hospital, or in more significant blood loss cases, you'll need a blood transfusion. Well, you want to make sure that you give someone the matching blood, because if you give someone the wrong type of blood, these antigens will interact badly, and it could lead to the blood cells bursting, and then you would inevitably die. But, I'm an A positive blood type, so I can have blood from an A positive person. If someone is B negative, they can have blood from a B negative person. Now, there are some caveats. Let me go back. Let's do purple. Type O is the universal donor. So we're not going to get into the specifics of how, but just know that anybody can receive blood type O. It has to do with the fact that it doesn't have any antigens, so it can't react badly. But all you need to know is O is the universal donor. The way that I remember this is that there's an O in donor, and that matches the O. So actually, I'm an A positive blood type, so I can receive blood from someone with A positive blood, or I can receive O blood, O negative. So anybody can receive O. It's a universal donor. Then on the other hand, AB blood type is the universal recipient. And that means that if you're lucky enough to be AB blood, even though it's more rare than other blood types, but if you're lucky enough to be an AB blood type, you can receive blood from anybody. So AB can receive blood from anybody, AB, O. All right, so we've talked about the blood types. We've talked about the blood types based off of what antigens are present. The last thing I want to introduce, second to last thing, because we got to get to the RH. The second to last thing to introduce is the antibodies. In addition to the antigens, which are on the red blood cell surface, we have antibodies in the plasma. These are the opposite of the antigens. So whatever antigen you have, you'll have the opposite antibody. So if someone has the A antigen, they're going to have the anti-B antibody in the plasma. In the B blood type, that person's going to have the anti-A antibody. Let's look at the AB blood type. Because they have both A and B antigens, there is no opposite that they don't have. So the AB blood type won't have any antibodies. And lastly, the O blood type doesn't have any antigens, A or B, which means that in the plasma, they're going to have both anti-A antibodies and anti-B. So with the antibodies, it's the opposite of the antigens, and the antibodies are located in the plasma versus the antigens, which are on the red blood cell surface. Okay, the last thing to talk about, what color can I pick? Let's do orange. Last thing to talk about is the RH. And this determines whether your blood type is positive or negative. So here we go. There's another separate series of antigens called RH. And it's pretty simple because either you have them or you don't. If you have the RH, so if RH is present, that person is positive. If there is no RH, that person is negative. So I would suggest you to first understand what we just talked about with the antigens and antibodies, to determine what antigens are present, what antibodies are present, and what their blood type is, which is based off of the antigens. Lastly, just look at the RH. So if a person is blood type A, lastly, we're going to look at the RH. If they have the RH, that becomes an A positive. If they don't have the RH, that becomes an A negative. That is it, my friends. All right, stick with this. You can do it. You got it. All right, so the rest of this I'm going to let you watch on your own. I have posted a video of me going through the blood typing experiment in the lab, which is basically how people determine blood type. So you're going to want to watch that and fill in the table. And then the last two parts of this lab are about pulse and your blood pressure. So pulse, we can determine how many times the heart beats per minute by feeling a pulse in the artery. One common place to do it is here on the thumb side of your wrist, using 2 fingers. Don't press down too hard. But with some practice, you should feel a little bump, bump, bump. That's the pressure that the blood is going through the arteries with, or how many times it goes through the arteries. And this is a good place to feel it simply because that particular artery is very superficial or close to the skin. So I'm going to have you measure your pulse rate at rest and then after exercise. And lastly, we have to talk about blood pressure. So in addition to the heart being able to pump out the appropriate amount of times, we also need the blood that goes through those vessels, pumped out by the heart. We also need the blood in those vessels to be at the appropriate pressure. You know, sometimes we want blood pressure to be high. If you're exercising, I want the heart to pump out blood faster and with more force to get that blood to my muscles. But if I'm sitting here at rest, I don't need my blood pressure to go up. So it's a very important balance. And as you know, if you go to the doctor, one of the vital signs that they'll check is blood pressure for this reason. The blood pressure is given as two numbers, a top number over a bottom number. The unit is millimeters of mercury. The top number is said to be the systolic blood pressure, and the bottom number is said to be the diastolic blood pressure. 120 over 80 is a normal blood pressure. The top is when the heart is contracting, systolic blood pressure, and the bottom is when the heart is in a relaxation phase. Because we're not in the lab, you can't do it yourself, but I've got a video, and I'm going to ask you to watch two videos, and in both, the first one's going to teach you how someone takes a blood pressure measurement, and you're going to be able to watch it and watch the little dial on the blood pressure cuff thing. And I'm going to actually have you, based on how they tell you to do it, determine what the blood pressure is. And then here's a second example where they just show you the sounds for practice. And then you'll fill those in, and here's a picture. All right, folks, good luck with everything. I am here if you have questions.